The phone call arrived on a Tuesday, a day usually dedicated to the quiet, methodical battle against the infuriating vagaries of a particularly stubborn spreadsheet. The glow of the monitor, usually a familiar comfort, felt alien and harsh as I stared at the conflicting figures. Then the insistent buzz of the landline sliced through the office air. A detective, his voice a smooth, unhurried baritone, asked if I'd ever heard of a girl named Lily Mae Peterson. The name, I recall thinking, was utterly devoid of recognition. Not then, at least. He explained with a dispassionate professionalism that belied the gravity of the situation, that it was a missing child case, dating back to 1993. Apparently, a genealogical DNA test I'd undergone a few months prior, a casual foray into ancestry that had felt more like a novelty than a tool for revelation, had established a distant biological link. He needed a DNA sample, he'd emphasized, purely as a means to eliminate possibilities, to cross a potential connection off a very long list. I'd agreed, my curiosity piqued by the morbid allure of a forgotten family secret, a box ticked on some obscure ancestral chart. Then came the follow-up a week later. The detective's voice, previously a model of measured calm, now carried a carefully controlled weight, a subtle shift that set my teeth on edge. "We've made a match," he'd stated, the words dropping into the sudden silence of my office like stones into a still pond, their ripples of implication spreading outwards. "Lily Mae Peterson is your biological sister. And the last person known to have seen her alive was your mother." The impact was visceral, a sudden dizzying lurch as if the very ground beneath me had dissolved. My mother, the woman whose hands, so capable and yet so gentle, had ironed my shirts with meticulous care even as I navigated the awkward independence of college. The woman whose birthday cakes, baked from scratch with secret family recipes, were legendary. The woman who, without fail, always offered a comforting arm around my shoulder, a warm, solid presence whenever life presented its inevitable challenges. My mother, who had always painted our family portrait as an idyllic, if perhaps a touch bland tableau of harmonious domesticity. A unit I had always assumed complete and unblemished. A unit that it now seemed possessed a gaping, uncharted void. The detective, bless his detached efficiency, didn't press for immediate answers, simply offering to facilitate a meeting with the social worker assigned to the case. But his words had already done their irreversible work. Asterisk your mother. The last person to see her alive. Asterisk the phrase replayed itself, a chilling refrain. The ensuing days were a disorienting haze. My mind, usually so adept at organizing facts and figures, became a chaotic archive of fragmented memories. I replayed every shared meal, every casual conversation, every faded family photograph, searching for an anomaly, a subtle discord I had somehow overlooked. Was there a missing piece in the familiar puzzle of our lives? A shadow lurking just beyond the edges of my perception? My mother was a creature of unwavering routine. Her life, from my vantage point, had always been as predictable and reassuring as the daily sunrise. She volunteered at the local library, her dedication to the Dewey Decimal System bordering on the monastic. Her book club meetings were sacred rites, her opinions on literature delivered with thoughtful consideration, and her devotion to her grandchildren was, at times, almost alarming in its ferocity. And yet this Lily Mae, who was she? Why had her existence been so completely absent from my world? The silence surrounding her name was profound, a palpable void that had been meticulously, expertly maintained for nearly 3 decades. It was a silence so absolute it spoke volumes. Sarah, the social worker, was a woman of gentle persistence. She confirmed the facts with a quiet compassion that was both reassuring and heartbreaking. Lily Mae Peterson, she explained, had been a vibrant 3-year-old girl who had simply vanished from a sun-drenched park on a warm June afternoon in 1993. My mother, then a young woman named Eleanor, had been Lily Mae's babysitter. There had been no witnesses to her disappearance, no suspects identified, and not a single tangible trace left behind. The case had quickly grown cold, a festering, painful mystery that had cast a long shadow over a small community, and, as I was now discovering, had profoundly impacted my own family. Sarah explained that my mother had always maintained her innocence, that the investigation, despite its intensity, had never yielded sufficient evidence to bring charges against anyone. But my DNA, obtained through that casual ancestry test, had inexplicably reopened the door, not because it implicated me, but because it unequivocally confirmed my mother's biological connection to Lily Mae, a connection she had deliberately and for so long concealed. The meeting with my mother was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon at her home. I remember walking through her familiar front door with a carefully constructed composure, an artificial calm that served as a flimsy shield against the tempest brewing within me. She greeted me with her customary warm smile, a genuine warmth that had always been the hallmark of her embrace. The air, as always, was perfumed with the subtle, comforting scent of her signature rose potpourri. But as we settled into the plush comfort of her living room, the silence that fell between us was no longer comfortable. It was thick with the weight of unspoken truths, of years of carefully guarded secrets. I didn't accuse, I didn't demand. I simply asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Mom, who is Lily Mae Peterson?" Her smile, so readily offered moments before, faltered. Her eyes, usually so bright and clear, like polished gemstones, clouded over, losing their usual luminescence. She looked away, her gaze fixing on a framed photograph of my own children, their youthful faces beaming from the mantelpiece. That's a complicated story, darling," she whispered, her voice barely audible, cracking with an emotion I couldn't yet fully comprehend. I waited, the passage of time marked only by the slow, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick resonating like a hammer blow against my fragile composure. "Complicated stories," I said, my voice remaining steady, deliberately so, "have beginnings, Mom. And mine, as it turns out, just began with a detective and a DNA kit." The confession, when it finally came, wasn't an outpouring of dramatic tears or cathartic pronouncements. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling, like a tightly wound spool of thread gradually coming undone. Lily Mae, she explained, was her younger sister. Her parents, my maternal grandparents, had kept Lily Mae's existence a secret, a source of profound shame and scandal for reasons that Eleanor, as a child, hadn't fully understood. Eleanor had been tasked with Lily Mae's care, a responsibility she had resented with the fierce, unforgiving intensity of adolescence. On that fateful day, Eleanor, then a teenager, had been distracted, caught up in a phone conversation, a rare moment of teenage self-absorption. When she'd finally looked up, Lily Mae had simply vanished. The ensuing panic, the overwhelming fear, the relentless, intrusive questioning from the police, it had all been unbearable. Her parents, desperate to protect their carefully cultivated reputation, had convinced Eleanor to maintain a story of an unknown abductor, to never admit that she, and she alone, had been responsible for Lily Mae's care that afternoon. They had moved away shortly after, leaving the grief, the guilt, and the unanswered questions behind them. Eleanor had lived with that secret, that gnawing guilt, that profound, suffocating silence, for her entire adult life. She had married, had children, had built a life, and had buried the truth so deep within herself that she had almost convinced herself it had never been real. Until now. Until I, her daughter, had unknowingly unearthed it. "You were never meant to find out," she finally choked out, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated anguish. I couldn't bear for you to know." The words, "You were never meant to find out," reverberated in my mind, a stark testament to her intentions. It wasn't an apology, not in the true sense of the word. It was a declaration of purpose, a desperate, misguided attempt to shield me, or perhaps herself, from the crushing weight of the truth. For years she had meticulously curated my reality, a carefully constructed narrative that deliberately excluded a fundamental, painful part of her own past, and by extension a fundamental, painful part of our family's history. This wasn't about a crime in the conventional sense, no act of malice or violence. It was about omission, about control, about a maternal instinct that had been warped and twisted into a lifelong deception. There was no grand, dramatic confrontation, no explosive shouting match. As Eleanor finally surrendered to her grief, tears streaming freely down her face, I simply reached across the physical and emotional space that had opened between us and took her trembling hand. Her confession, the raw, exposed vulnerability that radiated from her, was a consequence in itself. The perfect, flawless facade had finally crumbled, revealing the jagged, imperfect edges that lay beneath. The aftermath wasn't marked by a dramatic social fallout. My father, bless his quiet pragmatism, listened to Eleanor's story with a stoic silence that, in its own way, spoke volumes. He had suspected something, of course, the way husbands often do, sensing unspoken currents beneath the surface of domestic tranquility, but he had never pressed. Now he simply held Eleanor, a silent, unwavering pillar of support. My own children, still too young to comprehend the complex nuances of betrayal and hidden history, were thankfully shielded from the immediate emotional turmoil. The real consequence was subtler, manifesting in quiet, almost imperceptible shifts in the fabric of our relationship. The unquestioning trust one had placed in my mother, the bedrock upon which my childhood had been built, had been irrevocably shaken. It wasn't that I suddenly viewed her as a fundamentally bad person, but I saw her, with a clarity that was both painful and illuminating, as flawed as undeniably human, as someone who had carried an immense burden that had shaped her in ways I was only beginning to understand. Our conversations, once so easy and uninhibited, began to change. They became more honest, yes, but also more cautious, more guarded. The effortless familiarity was gradually replaced by a subtle, ever-present awareness of the hidden depths, the unspoken histories that lay just beneath the surface of our exchanges. I found myself withdrawing, not out of anger, but as a means of quiet assessment, a deliberate recalibration of our dynamic. I stopped calling as often. When we did speak, I steered our interactions towards the light, focusing on mundane topics, carefully avoiding any subject that might, however inadvertently, lead us back to those shadowed corners of the past. It was a deliberate, almost imperceptible distancing, a quiet reassertion of boundaries. I didn't need to punish her. The revelation itself, the dismantling of her carefully constructed narrative, had already created an unbridgeable chasm. My continued, calm and measured presence, devoid of the unqualified adulation she had grown accustomed to, served as a form of quiet justice. She had maintained a meticulously controlled narrative of her life, and now that narrative was irrevocably altered, not by external forces, but by the very person she had so desperately sought to protect. The knowledge that I knew that the secret was out, that the carefully constructed illusion was gone, was a constant, humming awareness for her. The social worker continued her dedicated work, her efforts focused on understanding the historical circumstances surrounding Lily May's disappearance, and providing whatever support she could to Eleanor. The police, armed with the new information, revisited the cold case file, though the inexorable passage of time offered little tangible hope for a definitive resolution. For me, the true resolution was internal. I had sought the truth and I had found it, in all its painful, messy complexity. It had changed everything, irrevocably so. But it was also mine, a truth I now possessed and understood. The betrayal, the years of silence, the hidden sister. It was all now an intrinsic part of the tapestry of my life. And in that quiet knowing, in the new, carefully calibrated distance that had settled between us, there was a sense of profound, unyielding peace. The world hadn't ended, not in a cataclysmic sense, but it had fundamentally rearranged itself, and I, for the first time, felt like I was standing on my own solid ground, no longer dependent on the shaky foundations of a fabricated past.